Okay, this is the first of our two parts for the judicial branch. A lot of this I went over where we have the judicial branch basics and went over it for the vocabulary for that pass-fail quiz. That was done on purpose so that you pretty much got introduced to it twice along the way. And so that's why I'm then feeding it to smaller parts that you have. Now, first of all, the AP College Board is not going to test you on a lot of things that are general legal terms. They're just going to expect that you know it. So that's why I normally go over and make sure you know the difference between criminal and civil law. Notice that the prosecutor in criminal law is the government. So if I'm charged for murder, it will be Florida versus Bass. If it's a U.S. crime, the U.S. versus Bass. So let's say I have a tax crime. Meanwhile, civil law, the plaintiffs are the ones that are suing each other. So, and it can be, you can sue the government in that case. So know the difference between those. The idea in the judicial system of the things that we have, the plaintiff and the defendant that we have, whether it's criminal or civil. Attorneys can be called counsel. Here's where a court case that we will have that you must know. Gideon versus Wainwright. In the Gideon case, this is where Earl Gideon from here in Florida will have a pauper's paper, which you will have to get a court case that is sent to the Supreme Court. They will look at it, and where he had a very low education, could not afford an attorney, that made it where attorneys would be provided for felony cases, later on the misdemeanor. So you have that idea. Now, we've had cases since then that it doesn't say that you have to have a great attorney or sometimes even a sober attorney there. Our judges in the lower courts, they act more as referees. They are not able to be as powerful as you think. They cannot question the witnesses like in the British courts. Now in the appeals court, this is where there's a lot more power by the judges there when it comes to oral arguments. We also have to go and look and see how in these cases the groups come in. Remember amicus curiae or friends of the court briefs. So you will have interest groups that will go and they will say, yes, us too, when there's a court case in here. The ACLU is something you're going to need to be familiar with, the American Civil Liberties Union, which protects civil liberties and the ideas that you have. You're going to see a couple of court cases that we have that part. All right, original versus appellate jurisdiction. This is an idea you must have. I know I had it on the basics quiz there, but the original is where the cases are first heard. These go on the facts there. Most cases don't go past this. Most of these are in the U.S. District Court there, that's in the federal system. Meanwhile, a small percentage do get appealed and are heard. When they are heard, they don't review the facts. That is, again, by the original jurisdiction. They are going to go, and it's a lot of writing, and you have a short oral argument there's no jury. The judges, when they are looking at things, they are going to look at something and see, is there something that was done that was against the Constitution? So if, let's say, it's a murder case that jumped up to the federal court system, they're not saying, okay, was the gun and the bullet come from this gun and are the forensics? No, they will be looking at, was there a proper search warrant in order to get that gun? Concurrent jurisdiction. This is a new one that was not in our basics vocabulary. But where I just mentioned that a case could go from state to federal, that means that it's concurrent. Most don't, and it's not the actual case. It is, was there some sort of violation? Usually this is where we think of the Fourth Amendment or the Fifth Amendment or even the 14th Amendment that you have. Was there a violation of one of the rights federally in this case there? Again, I gave the example of, was there a search, which we're going to see the case Mapp versus Ohio was that way that occurs. So concurrent is when it jumps from the state to the federal. And just like when we had for federalism, this is where the federal courts are supreme there. One of the things you do need to know is, when does the Supreme Court have original jurisdiction? Okay. Normally they are an appeals court, but there are a small number where I know I kind of used the number of around 100 cases a year. There may be around 10 that are original jurisdiction. So when do they go? You will notice a couple of commonalities to it here. Cases between two states, state and a federal government, state and a federal government. So if you see that it's involving a foreign government or a state as a policy or as a party, that's where in a federal case that it will be seen. Again, if Florida is suing Georgia, we don't want the case in Florida, we don't want the case in Georgia, it goes to a federal court, may go straight to the Supreme Court when you have that. Again, if Florida's suing a foreign country, that's not in the side. All right, where does our court system come from? The Judiciary Act of 1789 made our basic design, and we're still following it today. The lowest level they designed were the district courts. These are the trial courts. The big difference is we have a lot more than we had in 1789. Every state has to have at least one. I believe even the 4094 is not up to date in here. All of those have original jurisdiction. We then have the courts of appeal. This did not start with the original Constitution there, but this is where we would have some of the circuits, and what would it be is that the some Supreme Court justices would go and they would hear then the appeals courts, and then they go to the Supreme Court. But in the 1800s, we will establish this mid-level, so the Supreme Court was not so overloaded that we have. The D.C. Circuit Court will hear cases involving federal agencies, if you're there. And then what was the bottom of this page, but the top of our hierarchy are the Supreme Courts. So I know I had a different graph when I have for our basics quiz, but you notice here that things go up. Now, from states, this is where that's concurrent. It can go up, it could go to the appeals, it could go straight to the Supreme Court. This is the path of most federal courts. District, circuit courts of appeals there. International courts of trade could go this way. Notice the military courts, they can go in there, the court of claims that you have. Where you look and see in here, the Supreme Court, again, we have the different levels. Supreme Court, again, on top. Here are some of our different circuit courts that we have. Here are where district courts are. We are part of the Tampa District Court, although there is a federal court in Ocala that is part of the tax court in here. So that's why it's divided up. Mentioned concurrent court, this is where federalism is shown. We have two similar court systems there, where we had the hierarchy for the federal, we have in the state list. Now, it goes by a little bit different because you notice that it's county, circuit, then we have the district courts are called the appeals, and then the Florida Supreme Court. But it's that hierarchy that you have. So you don't have to know that hierarchy here. Make sure you know the federal hierarchy as you go along. But the design is much the same. Numbers aren't always the same. You notice where we have different circuits. There's 5 different circuits there for the district courts of appeals that are like the federal circuits in here. So we have a dual court system. Our state courts handle state crime, federal courts handle federal crime. So if I'm arrested for murder, it will be Bass versus Florida. Now, if I have a tax problem, it's Bass versus the United States. Now, if it involves the rights, that's where that concurrent jurisdiction comes, if it for some there, and that's where the ACLU is many times going to be the one you're going to see represents our area. But the supremacy clause, just like everything else in federalism, when it goes up, the U.S. government is supreme. The U.S. Constitution is supreme. That's the supremacy clause here. Going back to the Incorporation Doctrine, and this is where over time the federal government has gained a lot more power with the Gideon case that we have. The Incorporation Doctrine, where the 14th Amendment says that the Bill of Rights must be incorporated within the states in here. All right, an important thing, and I can see this being this is a reoccurring AP type question there. How do you select a court member? Not just Supreme Court, although that gets the most publicity. Federal judges and justices for the Supreme Court. Remember, the president selects them, but they have to be approved by the Senate. So you got to think your checks and balances. What are some things? If you are a president, will you appoint someone that's very controversial there? This is where in the Senate you have the Judiciary Committee where the hearings are heard. On this district court level, and even with the appeals court level, the senatorial courtesy that we had in our basics vocabulary, as well as in the legislative branch there. So if there is a new judge that's going to be appointed to the Tampa District Court here, what happens is the president will make sure that they confer with the Florida senators. Does not mean like Biden's president's a Democrat right now, but that does not mean that both Republicans get who they want. But Biden will give them a list and say, who would you contend with there? And you work with them some there. So Biden's not going to be able to appoint someone really liberal with two Republican senators here. But we'll probably have a lot more moderate person. All right, why is this so important? The legacy of the president is what happens after that. John Adams was only president for 4 years, but the Marshall Court will be for 30-something years after that. The Federalist Party will die out, but their party will live on in the Supreme Court. Donald Trump was president for 4 years, but he appointed 3 justices. So right now, 1/3 of the Supreme Court was appointed by Donald Trump. A lot of times being president's been lucky at the right time. Trump was able to appoint 3 in a 4-year period, Obama 2 in a 8-year period, Bush 2 in an 8-year period. So that's why the legacy has it. Even to say how it is. So this is where John Roberts, Alteo were the 2 that President Bush had. In 2040, so think about what will your age be when you're in 2040. Some of you might even have kids in high school in 24. They could still be on the Supreme Court then. And they've been on there now for over 15 years. So yes, we're talking about a long period of time. President Bush will not have been president for a long time, but his legacy lives on. Term you need to know is a litmus test. Notice it has nothing to do with acid on the case. But what it is there a certain issue or issues that you kind of look and say, I got to make sure that it judges one way or another. Normally, the example given to that is pro-life or pro-choice. Now, presidents are always asked, did you, in interviewing your candidates for this, did you ask them? And they'll say, no, I never asked them. But you already know. You read over their former decisions. What are they writing if they were a law professor? What are they writing in their opinions on cases they already decided on lower courts? So, no, you don't have to ask them a question. You know how a judge is going to go by their past and here. President Reagan will start with a lot of the judicial federalism, his selection of federal judges, which will become more partisan. Clinton will continue it there. Bush and Clinton aren't extreme with what they're doing, but they have more that way. Obama goes a lot more on the extreme, and Trump goes even more so for his selection of a lot of the judges where they were. And that's why right now we have not just on the Supreme Court, but down throughout the courts, a lot more of the very partisan judges that you have. All right, so officially, again, to become part of the Supreme Court, you're appointed by the president and you are confirmed by the Senate. That's all you have to have on there. But here's what are unofficial things, and this is where in your writing you'll write about it. Your political ideology. Okay, I don't think that Joe Biden's going to appoint someone that's extreme conservative there. So that's where you have it. What's your experience? You don't have to have experience, but the more that you have, the more that they see how you're going to rule. You have to consider the Senate. You cannot appoint someone that you know that the Senate is not going to approve. What is their loyalties that they have to maybe you as a person or to your party? And yes, you do need to consider race and gender there. So when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, President Trump, he could have chosen a male, but there would have been a bigger backlash than when he chose a female to replace the female at this time. So again, it doesn't always happen in that way, but that's where you kind of look in here. What have recent presidents done in their selection of justices? This is where we will look and see. And some of you might say recent. Yeah, that goes back to the 80s. What will end up happening here? President Reagan will have some that are extreme with Bork and then Robert Ginsburg. And what will end up happening is their backlash and will end up like Ginsburg will withdraw. Clarence Thomas. This is where when H.W. Bush will appoint Clarence Thomas, we will have a lot of the hearings about things from back in the 70s and the 80s that he had. Was he doing things that would be today seen as sexual harassment? 2016 with Merrick Garland, President Obama appointed him in 2016. Now this was early in the year, but we will have Mitch McConnell will use the rules of the Senate and will block the confirmation of it, and Merrick Garland will never be appointed will never make it to the Supreme Court. As Mitch McConnell will say in 2016, it's an election year, we will let the next president do it. Now, 4 years later, we have a case with Amy Coney Barrett where a month before the election we have the case, and this is where Mitch McConnell will then push it through. Neither time did Mitch McConnell do anything illegal. Now, was it the right thing to do? Either time you can make the argument one way or another because he was a hypocrite one way or the other when he did it that way. But the selection is a political process. He used the political rules to his advantage. 2018, we will have, when President Trump appoints Brett Kavanaugh, we will have a big backlash about for Kavanaugh on some of the things that he had done in his past here, and this is where trying to stop it. But what had happened for some of the rules, the filibuster rule had been taken away in confirmation. So Democrats they're the ones that originally took away the filibuster and appointees when they were trying to push through some of Obama's. Well, now when they were a minority party, they can no longer stop some of Trump's because of the rule change that they made. So it's one of the things that you always have to think about. If you change the rules, it might benefit you there, but later on, it might hurt you, which is that case that happened that time. All right, as court as a policymaker, we will, and again in the basic side, the basis of our court is precedents. All right, lower courts have to follow what the rulings are, and that's why when you have the opinions that are written, what are so important in here. If something is unclear, they are supposed to have it. Now, when we go through all our different court cases, you're going to notice that these four courts are the ones you're going to see the large majority of our 38 cases that you have to know. The Marshall Court early on that expands federal power with Marbury versus Madison, McCullough, Gideon case. The Warren Court, all the civil rights cases, rights of the accused. Again, we have a bunch of the Warren case. The Burger Court was not really seen as liberal or conservative because there's some directions on both of those that you have. The Rehnquist Court will kind of be a little, the pendulum swings back. The Roberts Court, well, we've had him on here for over 15 years, but we've had a lot of changes on the court. Will his legacy be? This is one reason why a lot of conservatives don't like John Roberts, is because he doesn't always rule conservative, because he doesn't want to be seen as the most partisan Supreme Court ever. So many times he's actually been the deciding vote with liberals to change it there. Precedent training Supreme Court decisions, and you will notice that there's a few every year that are one side or another. But even on the Roberts side, you'll notice that, yeah, we've had some years with a lot of conservative ones, but we've had also, in pure numbers, almost as many liberal. Now, that may not happen now that the numbers are definitely skewed towards the conservatives. But you can see that there are lots of. Notice that the Warren Court is the one that has the most on the liberal, not too much of what could be considered conservative. Amicus curiae, the friends of the courts. This is where, for the interest groups, when we had it, if there's a court case, let's say that we have Duke Energy is going to build a new nuclear plant over in Crystal River. So the Sierra Club makes a lawsuit that is trying to stop it over something with environmental law that we have. And the Manatee Club, they will maybe file a amicus brief, which says basically the same reasoning that they have in there, that you should or shouldn't do it. We will find in recent years where we've had even for states that were suing there. So a state sues against Obamacare, and other state attorney generals do amicus briefs in here. I will talk a lot about clerks on the courts in here. If you are graduate from a top law school like Yale, Harvard, Georgetown, that is where, if you're a clerk on the court, it is the great path that you have. And if you're an interest group, if you can get someone there, because they know what the justices that they're working for and what different justices, what they like, and sometimes just the language that you have to try to get this case heard, which we'll see in our next section about how the cases are heard. Here's where you kind of see about the selection and how demographics are for various ones that you will see. Again, the selection process, not just for Supreme Court. Federal judges also have a lifetime in here. But here's where the idea that you have for, even though they're insulated in here, and then notice in here, checks and balances, once again, coming down to us.